So it's Friday the 13th, 2017. Friday the 13th is considered an unlucky day. Well, Friday the 13th wasn't always considered unlucky, and it really only started 710 years ago, and it's an important part of history. Now, what does Friday the 13th have to do with Switzerland, the Red Cross, ambulances such as the Order of Malta or the St. John Ambulance Service, or Walt Disney? Well, it all goes, well, including Freemasonry, well, it's all connected back to the 1300s and Pope Clement V and King Philip IV of France. Now, both of them were in debt to the Knights Templar. In 1306, Philip expelled the Jews from France because he was in debt and he needed to clear his debts. And so what he did, he launched another conspiracy, and that was against the Knights Templar, who were a military order but also got into banking. So one of the things that the Knights Templar did would be to provide security for pilgrims travelling to the Holy Land, very similar to the Knights Hospitaller and all the Knights of St. John. So both King Philip IV and Pope Clement V were nervous of and jealous of the growing power of the Knights Templar, so they launched a conspiracy against them. And the 23rd and technically the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar was Jacques de Molay. And so on October 13, 1307, 710 years ago, in a dawn raid, he and some of his fellows were arrested. For them, the 13th was a very important day, and they knew that they would be honouring this particular day, and they knew they would be able to catch them, and that's why Friday the 13th was chosen. Jacques de Molay and his brothers were tortured. Finally, he was executed March 18th, 1314, but before that, the Knights Templar were already disbanded. The Templars were considered heretics, and they were burned at the stake, again, usually tortured. This movement by the king and the pope would eventually lead to the Inquisition in a roundabout way, but not directly. Okay, so Knights Templar, did they really disappear in 1307? Well, not really. Remember, they were a famous military and then a very famous banking order, because one of the things they would do would be a pilgrim travelling to the Holy Land could deposit their money. He would be given certificates, and he would be able, and as he travelled, or they or she travelled towards the Holy Land, they'll be able to use these certificates to redeem their money, so their gold would not be stolen. And by operating just like a bank does, we could go from branch to branch and withdraw your money. This was how the military order also became a banking order, and as they became a banking order, they were good at their finances. The French king was in debt to them, and that's one of the reasons he had to get rid of them. But what has this got to do with Switzerland? Well, just as the Knights Templar were disbanded in 1307, basically the very next year, Switzerland went from a little backwater of Europe to being a military powerhouse, and the Swiss pikemen being one of the famous armies. Kings would want to use them as mercenaries because they were such skilled military men. This was where the order retreated to, and that's why the Swiss flag is basically the Knights Templar flag. But of course, Swiss pikemen, the military order, they went to becoming the banking powerhouse of Europe and the world. And it's also an interesting fact that the Swiss remained neutral, and they never really got attacked, even during World War I and World War II, while other countries would declare neutrality, and in especially World War I and World War II, this was not respected, but everyone seems to respect the Swiss and the neutrality because of their banking powerhouse that they are. And what has this got to do? Well, here we have the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and the York Rite. I mentioned Friday the 13th. There are 13 ranks. Well, just like there are 13 arrows in the $1 bill, 13 oak leaves. Again, the 13 colonies are 13 stars, 13 stripes in the shield on the dollar bill. 13 is a very important number. Also in geometry. So again, the flower of life is very important. Well, the flower of life basically will create 13 spheres, and 12 spheres wrapped around the 13th one in the core will then go on to create the dodecahedron, very important as well. But what has this got to do with Walt Disney? Well, Walt Disney was a member of the Order de Molay, and there I've highlighted it. It's one of the affiliated bodies. There you can see Order de Molay. It's basically a youth group that feeds into Freemasons, and of course named after Jacques de Molay, the last of the Grand Masters of the Knights Templar. And of course there's other references. I've highlighted the three top orders ranks in the in the York Rite. And what do we have to begin with? We have, okay, I'll just go back. So Order of the Knights Templar. You might notice that geometry, very important factor in this. Order of the Knights Templar, Order of the Knights of Malta, and Order of the Red Cross. So begin with Order of the Knights Templar. Well, there's no missing that one. Order of the Red Cross. The Red Cross is directly connected. It was this, to create their symbol, they just inverted the color scheme of the Swiss flag. Direct connection to the Swiss as well in the beginning of the. That's why the Red Cross is an internationally recognized, it's almost a country in itself, and that's an important feature, because we look at the Order of the Knights of Malta. So, for instance, in Ireland, when it was sectarian, probably still happens a bit now, Northern Ireland, if you're on the Catholic side of a wall, the Order of Malta ambulance would service you. If you lived on the Protestant side of a wall, you'd probably get a St. John ambulance. In Australia here, the St. John ambulance is the major ambulance service. But there's other connections, because here we have the flag of the Knights Hospitaliers, or the Knights of St. John, or the Knights of Malta, who have their headquarters in Rome. Now, where did the Knights Hospitaliers emerge from? Very similar to the Knights of Malta. They would provide hospital services. So, for instance, pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem, they would have a hospital there, and this is how they were built. But unlike the Templars, they were not disbanded or banished. And this is the Roman HQ of the Knights of St. John, Knights of Malta, Knights, which are all under this same basic banner. Bit of difference, but essentially it's the same. And what's an interesting feature about them? Well, they're a sovereign order under international law still to this day, and they're basically just like the Vatican is a separate country. This building is essentially its own sovereign nation within Rome. They even produce their own passports. Basically, if you're a member of the order, you're the equivalent of a prince, in that you have a diplomatic passport, and that you have under international law, in the protocols, you basically have these important. Is a difference about you're like a diplomat. You have a princely level of legal protections, and that's one of these features. And so Friday the 13th, this is what's it's a whole layer, in regards to our history, where a lot of this stuff comes from. A lot of it's hidden in plain sight. It's also got a lot to do with the good works as well. There's always politics involved, and that's military politics and banking's a dirty, dirty business, and so you're always going to get that in there. But also the origins of this and these types of orders have a lot to do with mutual aid societies, and they were again fighting the power of the kings of divine right and the popes and their rights, and that's one of the reasons also why the Knights Templar were not well liked by the powers that be. And so there you go. That's why is Friday the 13th special, and what's the connections? Well, it's more than what you think it is anyway. It's a bit different from the usual video, but just a quick intro into this particular realm. It's a lot of depth to it. Unfortunately, a lot of usual suspects will focus on and exaggerate one particular angle of it, but again, there's a lot more to this, a lot more it's worth looking into. With that, hope you enjoyed and have a good one.